Okay, hey everybody, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. To have another cool comparison for you guys between these two outstanding Seikos. A little bit about them. They were founded back in 1881. They're, of course, an iconic Japanese brand that cover all market segments from entry level to high end. And, their first few global releases, recently to bear that Marinemaster name internationally has been really, really fun to cover, for me to own and really kind of play with. Now, originally reserved for premium JDM models, now it's kind of more of a grade of watch. So it's not like this is the Marinemaster model. This is a Marinemaster grade 1968 high beat, inspired diver. Now, the first Marinemaster was actually a 100 meter SPB519 Transocean, which was a quartz-powered titanium watch from the late 1990s, but most fans will recall the 6159 high beat diver inspired lines that the JDM SBDX1001 Marinemaster 300, quote unquote, in terms of its nickname, of the early 2000s really popularized this design language, this look, and people really associate that with the Marinemaster. And in the past, some of these lower, more entry-level, mid kind of tier grade SPB Marinemasters only had 200 meters, so they'd call them, Marinemaster 200. But now there are actual Marinemasters with 200 meters of water resistance, and there's also, like this, you can see, just inspired watches, like 1968 inspired watches that do not bear the Marinemaster logo and are more affordable. So I think that's pretty cool. And it still has 300 meters of water resistance. So if you wanted to, you could call this a Marinemaster 300 or an MM300. It's not a Marinemaster grade, but a lot of people will associate, again, this design language with that particular watch. So today we're just going to talk about some of the differences. Both of these are kind of now in my long-term rotation. So this is going to be more of a perspective of an owner versus the perspective of just a reviewer who's going to have some light use with these. So with all that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get these pieces in hand, and take a closer look. Okay, so as you guys can see, very similar in terms of the iconography that's used here. You have, of course, the SPB519, or the JDM nomenclature being the SBEJ029, and this is a model that I sourced from Japan, so this is actually the Japanese nomenclature, but for, international purposes, most of you will know this as SPB519. Now, this model I did source locally here in the US, so the SLA079 Marinemaster 300, this has really been a watch that's dominated my wrist, and I have some very high-end competition that I put against this piece, and it just keeps finding its way back. And some of them are very collectible and rare Seikos, but for me, this one is just extremely wearable, and it encapsulates so much of what I love about this brand. And for me, the price point was totally worth it. Now, the MSRP on this is $2,900. Of course, I did source this through Belmont Watches in San Diego. They gave me a screaming deal. So if you're looking for one of these, I would suggest you check them out. Now, this model, though, can give you so much of what that Marinemaster gives you. Obviously, visually, the execution and the style is very similar. Now, the execution is not going to be quite as high-end. The movement isn't going to be quite as high-end, but there are trade-offs to that. Now, this goes for $1,700 MSRP, or you can get it for $1,200 from Sakura. I got it a little bit discounted deeper. I do have a discount code from Sakura watches as well, so if you are interested in this piece or any of their Casio, Citizen, Seiko watches, you can apply that discount and get a little bit of an extra, I say that discount code, and get a little bit more off there. But when we look at these, they're so much more manageable and wearable than that classic SBDX001 Marinemaster 300 of the past. Now, those watches always appealed to me in terms of their visual design language, but on the wrist, they just had too many compromises for me. They were a bit too thick and top heavy. The links were a bit too long, and it's just the proportions were odd because they were wider, but they still had 20 millimeter lugs. These have 20 millimeter lugs, but are much more wearable at about 42 millimeters. This one being 42.6, this one being an actual flat 42 millimeters. Now, in terms of the thickness, 13.4 here versus 13.4 there. So very close from that perspective. Lug to lug though, 48.4 versus here we're going to have a 49.1. So slightly longer lug to lug. For those of you with either rounder or smaller wrists in general, something like this is going to be able to wrap around your wrist much more easily. Now, they do both share that 300 meters of water resistance, and these are both ISO compliant watches, so they are suitable for scuba diving and air diving up to 300 meters. The previous models that had like the monoblock case and all that from this kind of design language, now those ones were actually saturation divers that kind of were more of a professional grade. I will say to most people, again, it won't make a difference. Especially considering like the world record for, skin diving and all that is going to be like, well, not for skin diving, just diving in general for a human is going to be closer to 200 meters, but most people aren't going to recreationally dive more than 40 meters. So again, not as much of an issue as you might think, but specs wise, these are still going to deliver an extremely capable package. Now, the main difference here is going to be capability. Now, here you have a collar style GMT. It does have an extended power reserve of 3 days, so the full 72-hour power reserve, which is quite nice. And also you're getting that additional complication. The trade-off, right, because this is a lower price model, is going to be that it's beating at a lower beat rate, just 3 hertz, which is going to be 21,600 vibrations per hour versus the very smooth and classic 4 hertz sweep of this second hand, which is going to be beating at 28,800 vibrations per hour. So different beat rates. This still has a nice power reserve of 50 hours versus here. So this is going to be slightly over 2 days. This is going to be the full 3-day model. So, again, a bit of a trade-off. Also, when we take a look at this dial, check it out. Granular, very nice texture here. Going to be more of that traditional sunray pattern, but this is a beautiful white sunray dial. You just don't see a lot of true white sun rays. A lot of times they're just kind of a pale silver that's going to render visually white, but it's actually silver, right? An opaline. Here you're getting an actual white dial that does have that nice sun ray texturing there, which I think is quite handsome. Also, I like the way that they integrated that sloped chaptering for the 24-hour scale for telling, multiple time zones there, and they kept the traditional dive bezel here. Again, traditional dive bezel. Another difference, they're openly calling this a ceramic bezel insert versus this is more of like a coated lacquered bezel insert. So very interesting, but I mean, in the past, that was kind of how it was for the classic Marinemaster 300s, doing the lacquered inserts, which are going to be more shock resistant, but in terms of scratch protection, not quite as strong as regular ceramic that you're going to see here in this more affordable model. So there's a lot that's the same, a lot to like. Of course, this is just going to be a little bit more of a simpler version of the bracelet. Here you're going to have that more traditional kind of 5-link style, where you're going to have those outer high polished intermediates in between, giving you just a little bit more flair, a little bit more style, and a little bit more of a throwback again to some of those earlier models. The biggest difference, though I shouldn't say the biggest, there's so many big differences, but one that's going to stand out for a lot of folks is going to be this new revised dive clasp. So it is a ratcheting wetsuit extension, as you guys can see. Some might try to use this as a micro adjustment. I don't think it's the best idea for micro adjustment, but I will say that, letting it out one click isn't completely unsightly. So if you have to do that, that's not a bad thing. It's better to have it and not need it than the other way around. And also, of course, they've learned and they've made these links much smaller. You can see they're closer to a grain of rice in terms of the length of there. So it would be nice if they had half links, but these regular links are already kind of somewhere in between a half link and a typical full length link. Now, you do get half links with this here. I don't think I'm utilizing any of the half links, but this has a more of a traditional clasp, as you can see, with just the fully milled section, and then the manual micro adjustment, and then a separate piece here that's more of kind of a hidden, diver's extension, which does, it does its job, but it's nothing inspiring at all. It is kind of not great looking, but for those of us that will never use it, it's nice that it's there and it's tucked away. So I appreciate that they took ownership and that most people aren't going to be using this dive extension. So let's just make it as minimal as possible and just focus on everything else that will be used on a more daily basis. So yeah, both of these, again, quite comparable, but pricing wise, quite different, right? Right under $3,000 and just under $2,000 in terms of full MSRP. Of course, you can always get deals because these are Seikos, even brand new. You can typically get a pretty decent deal. So with that said, let's actually get these onto the wrist now and see how they wear. Okay guys, now as you can see, this beautiful Marinemaster SLA079 on my 7.5 inch wrist, or for those of you that don't use inches, it'd be 19 centimeters in circumference. I think it looks absolutely outstanding. And of course, I do have a slightly larger than average wrist at 7.5 inches, but I will say that it's quite round and tall in terms of its profile. It's not like I have a really super wide and flat accommodating wrist. So I do have to take things into consideration in terms of that lug to lug and everything like that. So check this out, a little bit more tidy, but still quite nice. I do really like the way this wears. I'll say the difference in wear profile is quite negligible, to be honest, at least on my own wrist. If you have a smaller wrist or a different shape wrist, your mileage may vary. Of course, if I get my wrist a bit too close to the camera lens here, you're going to notice that all of a sudden the watch seems much larger. And again, that's because of that perspective distortion because of the focal length of the camera lens. So all I'll do is keep my wrist nice and low and then just tighten up the frame so that you can get still a detailed look, but just add a bit of a truer aspect ratio as to how this may lay on your own wrist. And check that out. Beautifully centered. Now you're seeing more of the sides of the bracelet draping around your wrist. It just feels more at home and it doesn't seem as oversized. To me, this is a full-size dive watch. It is not an oversized dive watch. This is kind of what this genre is about for many folks, especially when you start getting into this 300 meters and above club, where you're getting more into some of those more professional specs, where you're going to want something that just feels a bit more robust and capable. Now, of course, on the other side, check that out. Very nice. And again, for much less price there. Also, something you'll notice is the crystal. You can see it's a flat crystal that's slightly raised with a nice chamfer that goes around the outer portion, which does play with the light quite nicely, versus here you're going to get a bit more distortion because you have a dual curved sapphire. They both do have that inner anti-reflective coating, so it's going to help with legibility, but you can see that distortion is just giving you a bit more visual play, and I have to say I like that here. It's not overly high domed, it doesn't protrude in any weird way, and in the water it's going to really make this dial feel like it's being magnified. So I do like that from the more functional standpoint. Here, just from a clean wearable kind of ultimate legibility outside of the water look, I do really like how this looks. But with that said, let me know what you think is better out of the two on my own wrist. But we'll get these off the wrist, set up for some Lume shots, low light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. All right, as you can see, guys, really outstanding legibility. That Lume from Seiko is great. I think you can both, we can agree that both of these, although they glow better, clearly that Marinemaster grade model, the SLA, is finished to a higher level. You're getting a thicker application as well as just more area in terms of that application. So it's going to be much brighter. The other watch is no slouch. And if it didn't have this other watch kind of making it look bad, you'd still be quite impressed. But one thing I like to work in is going to be a bit of a low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find yourself coming in and out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, or just hanging out underneath the shade of a tree. So it is nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting. And as you guys can see here, whew. Now, there are watches that really go out of their way in terms of complex designs to really, capture the light, reflect it in fun ways. What I like here is that this is very organic. This is a style that, again, since 1968, Seiko have pioneered and refined over time. Like the Porsche 911, right? It's instantly recognizable and familiar, although every iteration adds kind of its own magic to the formula. That's how I feel about these 1968 silhouettes that are based off of that glorious original 6159 high beat diver. Ooh, check that out. You can see the dials are quite different. Look at the granularity on that SLA versus the SPB. You're going to get more of that sun ray, a little softer, a little bit more subdued, but I'll say maybe a little bit more luxurious and refined versus the granular one that really says, hey, this is a tool watch. This is a good piece of kit that you're going to be using for a functional purpose. And for me, that's a bit of a motivator. It's that it feels still like a tool watch. So many great tool watches and tool brands, you think about Rolex and Tudor, have now just kind of ascended into this kind of pseudo luxury space where it's more about the desirability and less about the capability. These watches are still watches that you're going to be able to wear and tear, wear out. And you know what? At the end of the day, you're less worried about servicing them and you're more worried about wearing them, which I think is really fun. So with that said, we'll go ahead and get the lights back on here and get into some closing thoughts. I personally own these two watches and I love them both, but I know I'm not like everyone. Some of you would be like, these watches look too similar. I could never have two watches that looked this close to each other in my collection, even with the different colors, even with the different functionality, different movement grades and everything like that. So if you're in this space, I will say at some point, I think Seiko's going to do, a Marinemaster kind of junior grade, which this kind of already is, but with the fun colors and everything like that, you're not going to get that simple black setup, at least not in the three-hand style. That might be a little bit too close for comfort in terms of like internal competition and cannibalizing their sales and everything like that. So I don't know if they're going to do that. I do know that in the past they have had 200 meter water resistant variations that did have the black setup. They had some gold accents. There's some really cool Euro spec models that recently posted that are going to be released pretty soon that had kind of a gilt setup that looked very, very cool. But I like both of these, and I think they offer something a bit different in both of their wear profiles. I feel like me owning the SLA makes me appreciate this SPB more than I would if I only owned the SPB. I might still be wanting and longing and wanting for more, but because I own this SLA, it makes me appreciate the more casual and carefree nature of this piece, which, for me helps me enjoy it even more because I'm not worried about babying it to any extent. I'm just enjoying it for what it is. They both have that Dia Shield hard coating. They both have that beautiful beveled edge that just screams Seiko's, design language. That's the nice thing about a heritage brand. You're getting iconography that is inherent to the brand versus something that's recreating, or recapturing a look, a vibe, right? Which a lot of brands do now, and they do it great. Some of those vintage inspired models, but they were inspired by watches like this, which I think is cool that you can get that more distilled take. You get that heritage. For me, that's where you get the value from, is when they're one of those pioneers within the space. Yes, you can get watches with similar specs for less, but they are lesser watches when it comes to their heritage, to their history, to their horological significance. Now, these models, they are rooted within a horological significance within mechanical wristwatch making, within Japanese watchmaking, within dive watch pioneering. And that's just something that's special. And for me, it makes it worth some of the premiums that you might pay that are associated with this. But then in the grand scheme of things, you look at the value proposition and maybe you compare it to something that's European, maybe Swiss made or German made, and the level of in-house nature that you're getting here, whether it be in-house design, in-house production, in-house movements, in-house rubies, in-house lubricants, in-house coatings, hairsprings, everything vertically integrated into Seiko. These start to become quite affordable when you think about how much they can undercut some of the more, let's just face it, cookie cutter European competitors. So with that said, let me know what you all think down in the comments below. Which direction do you lean after this video? What direction were you leaning before the video? If you own either of these, both of these, let me know your stories down in the comments below. And if you like the video, please do it like. And if you're already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.